Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates, the last one for the week. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you going?
I'm good, Bryce. Great to be back for the fourth and final instalment of our long-form interview with Michael Frazis from Frazis Capital Partners. We've had a big week. We've discussed his unbelievable returns in the last financial year. 93% net of fees.
Love to see it.
You'd take it. Anyone would take it. I'd
Yes.
love to take it. And then we spoke about what he's looking for in a company and his process for finding, those 10 baggers, maybe even 100 baggers, those hyper growth companies we all love to find. Yesterday we did Watchlist Wednesday, where we spoke about 3 stocks on Michael's watch list, and we're closing out the week with a discussion on life sciences. Because if you weren't impressed with Michael enough, with his 93% return in F21. He also has a Masters of Chemistry from Oxford.
Love to see it. It's our pleasure to welcome back to Equity Mates and AusBiz, Michael Frazis. Michael, how are you going?
Very good, thanks. Thanks for having me back on.
No worries. So as Alec said, you do have a Masters of Chemistry from Oxford, amongst being a star stock picker, and we're going to really dig in today on BioTech. As I said in yesterday's episode, it's a part of the market that I certainly don't have a huge amount of confidence in picking. Stocks and themes and trends, understanding everything about proteins and all sorts of bits and pieces is just not on my radar. So looking forward to this one. So let's start at the top, as we always do. BioTech has no doubt been at front of mind during COVID, and you're invested in a couple of companies exposed to that, being Moderna and co. We want to think about the industry before the current pandemic. What are you looking for in biotech investments at the moment?
Look, I think similar to the way we look at anything, you want to see results. I think one of the pitfalls in biotech is to just try and go for something and hope it works. Generally, those things don't work. You need to be convinced by the data. You really need to see something that convinces you that a company's onto something. And then generally we try and avoid single drugs, companies with like one drug or one treatment or one device, because generally they're pretty limited. They're quite risky. Life sciences is messy. Things often don't work out. Often people work 10, 20 years, and like these are the true heroes, 10, 20 years on something only to realize that for reasons outside their control, it doesn't work. So it's very tough. On the flip side, you've got a situation where companies can make absolute fortunes off basically IP. So there's a huge amount of reward for people that can get it right through a bit of luck and a bit of an extreme amount of hard work. And so what we look for, every company will have people like those. What we really want is we want companies that have technology that's so good that it can generate a pipeline of treatments. So you're not betting on the one drug. You're betting on the platform, and you're betting on decades of development, because those companies will often not just have IP, they'll also have, which can be protected by patents for a short period of time. They'll also have, that industry know-how. They'll be able to manufacture things. They'll have the best scientists and have that ability to generate entire pipelines. So the sweet spot is actually if you can find a company that has that kind of platform technology. So they have a pipeline across a bunch of different diseases and conditions, and they prove the platform works. They get the first one right. They get one thing that works, because then there's a good chance that they're going to roll that out across their pipeline, and it's going to work for a number of different things. And that's kind of the situation that mRNA is in now, where it's clearly worked outstandingly well for one virus. It'll almost certainly work for variants of, I guess, the coronavirus in this case. And there's literally no reason that anyone can really think of that should really have that it wouldn't work for a bunch of other different viruses as well. So all those companies are immensely exciting. They're up. Moderna's up 20 times since we bought it, and obviously a lot more before that. So it is somewhat late, but there are other companies like that. Another thing that's interesting about life sciences now, it's really become a data science. It's finally an information science. You can talk about information molecules. You can draw a distinction between companies trying to find one drug that works for one condition. There'll always be a role for that, and the vast majority of medicines and medical advances in pharmaceuticals have come from those kinds of drugs. But this whole class of information molecules is something relatively new. And if you think about mRNA, mRNA is a way of adding proteins effectively. So it doesn't change your DNA, which is a bit of a misconception. It's kind of in between DNA and proteins. And by changing that code, you can effectively make a whole range of different proteins that can cure disease or, for example, be part of a virus that then induces immunity. They can do all kinds of things. But that's like the start. There are other companies, for example, Alnylam, which has done pretty well in our portfolio, that does RNAi. So they interfere with mRNA. So they basically knock out the production of certain proteins. And again, once they've got that technology, at the moment it only really works for liver diseases, but with time they should be able to get that to work in all kinds of tissues in your body. They've also got a platform. So think about like where we stand as like people who obviously want to be as curative as many horrible diseases as possible. You have a way to kind of like add in proteins to do all kinds of interesting things. And you also have ways to knock out aberrant proteins or proteins that are overexpressed. And they're pretty interesting tools in the toolbox. Also, like previously we talked about companies that use protein degraders that have ways of targeting. Again, this is early stage, very good early data in human. But these are kind of much earlier on in the stage. I wouldn't say they're proven yet, but there's no reason for it not to work. Not to work as well as it has in its previous trials. That's another way that they'll be able to tag any protein of interest, or probably not any protein, but a number of proteins of interest that cause disease and knock them out as well. And so you've got ways of adding proteins, you've got ways of taking them out, and none of these things existed, and it's a whole new realm. It's such an exciting time to be around now and to see this stuff. It's fascinating. And I don't know, you guys, do you feel like technology is accelerating? Like I really do. This year you've got the information molecules, you've got cryptocurrency going ballistic, you've got multiple companies going into space. It seems like a very exciting time to be around.
It is a fascinating time to be, alive, I guess, investing. There's so much opportunity. But Michael, I've got to say, I love how excited you get about some of these biotech, innovations and technologies coming down the pipeline. I'm not going to pretend that I understood all of them, but to see someone who's in the know get excited, it just makes me feel confident that we're going to keep seeing a lot of great innovation. But you mentioned that you were pretty early in Moderna, up 20 times since the start of last year. A phenomenal investment and a phenomenal company. If you take us back to those pre-COVID days when you were looking at Moderna before it captured headlines around the world, how did you assess the company, and I guess what made you like it before everyone fell in love with it during COVID?
I think I was lucky. I actually met one of the scientific founders, or the chief scientific founder at Oxford, a couple of years ago. So I was aware of it, and actually I'd say I was late. We didn't get in early. We got in after they first started getting data on their coronavirus vaccine. So we could have done a lot better, and many people did. At the time it was considered one of the most overvalued, or the most overvalued biotech ever. And it's so funny how the same way the most overvalued car company, or the most overvalued fintech, these companies go on to become the best performing stocks. I don't know how much cause and effect there, but it is funny to see that dynamic play out again and again. Look, the interesting thing about Moderna is they came out with pretty good data really early that their vaccine was safe and evoked an immune response. And so it could have been possible that an evoked immune response was safe and didn't work as a vaccine, but that would really go against everything that we kind of know about the immune system. So it's no slam dunk, but it's in our view extremely convincing that it would actually work. So we're probably the least surprised out of everybody when it finally did. So that was kind of our thought process there. I think often it pays, particularly in life sciences, to get the data. Like wait until you can see it, because the company might rip 50%. And in this case, it probably went from $20 to $40 real quick. But it's the $40 to $340 that is the meat of the move, and that's where it's not as risky as you think, because you know it works. You've got the data. I think it almost always pays to get the data. And in life sciences, the first move is underdone, which is kind of another thing you can keep in your back pocket. So if a trial fails, often the stock will lose 50%, but it's probably a zero. So you're probably getting some of your money back anyway. Similarly, if the trial works and is an outstanding success, or maybe you just weren't across a company and it's come out with some results that, front pages on all the biotech kind of newsletters and things, often it's worth 10 or 20 or 30 times as much, and the stock might be only be up 50 to 100%. So there are opportunities in that kind of thing as well. I think now, just while we're on Moderna, I think the new thing in coronavirus is actually treatment. So there's extremely effective antibodies now. So there's one from Regeneron, which a friend who advises us, prescribed in an ICU a couple of days ago. It looks like it cuts like, the length of symptoms by 80%, the number of people that become symptomatic by 80%. And what they basically did is they took 1,500 people who were exposed to coronavirus, as measured by household contact, tested positive, and then they gave them the treatment, and then they measured who got sick. And so you've now got another tool in the toolbox for coronavirus, where if somebody's exposed, you can probably cut their risk of disease by 80%. There's actually another, and that's just one. That was Regeneron's antibody that I'm referring to. That's just one of many antibodies on the market or coming to market. Regeneron is approved and on the market, but there's a bunch that are coming to market. So another one, and then this is the last one I'll talk about. So they basically, the way you do this stuff is you get a whole universe of antibodies and you see which ones, work, which ones neutralize a particular virus of interest. In this case, COVID-19. There's another firm called Adario who did that, selected, a couple hundred candidates that did a pretty good job of that, and then applied it to the original SARS and a bunch of other related viruses as well, and then picked the candidate that worked best for all of them. And the reason that's interesting is because if it works for all these extremely varied mutated viruses of the same family, there's a good chance that it's targeting a part of the virus that is conserved, that is the same across all of them, that is important for function for some reason that doesn't need to be explained. But for whatever reason, for all variants, including variants 20 years apart, like COVID-19 and COVID-1 and COVID-2, or SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2, if it's conserved, it's probably quite important, and it probably means if you can find an antibody that hits it, it's going to work for future variants as well. So I think that would be an interesting one as well. And then think about what that does to kind of the virus and the politics around it. If you already got people vaccinated, the vaccines aren't perfect, but they're pretty good. And then people who do get very ill then have something that cuts their risk of serious disease by 80, 90%. It's a completely different story to where we were a year and a half ago.
There's no doubt, Michael, that you know a lot about this space and you certainly know what you're talking about. And when it comes to investing in this, I think that's obviously incredibly important. So as beginner investors or those interested in getting access to the innovations that are coming through, what would your suggestions be to people wanting to get access? Like, is an ETF, BioTech ETF, the right approach, or are you missing out on all of these companies that are not in the ETF? How do you think about navigating it for someone who doesn't have a Master's of Chemistry from Oxford?
Good question. I guess if this information molecule thesis is correct and there will be countless new treatments, each one of those treatments will create a lot of value, like on an overall basis. It's not zero sum. And so you would expect, the indices to do pretty well over that period. They're pretty volatile. I'd say for somebody that's not deep in the space, and basically everybody I work with, I know the least out of all of them. I can promise you that. We have a couple of advisors that, I'm no expert on this stuff at all. But I think if you're coming to it without any kind of expertise or any kind of familiarity, I'd stick to the biggest names, stick to the index. And if you believe in this kind of information molecules, the top companies in the sector. They're pretty easy to find. You can use revenue growth and things like that to identify the ones that are attracting dollars, and they're probably your safest bet. But I'd say on the ASX, there's pitfalls. There's companies that I think the problem is very hard for a company to die. So let's say a company comes out with a weak data, the kind of data that it might work, it might not. But to me, that means it doesn't work. Something that works should convincingly work. You should know it works. If they dose 50 people, you should see an effect. If there might be an effect, to me, there's no effect. And to the people the scientists that we work with, if it's not extremely statistically rigorous, they assume it's as good as worthless anyway. But the problem is these companies come out with data that might show like a small group of the population did well or something like that. And the companies don't just switch off, they stay there, and then they'll attract new kind of retail investors and they'll sell the dream. Look, if this works, we're going to make 20 times your money. There are a few of those in the ASX, and I'd be pretty careful there. I'd stick to like the ones with really good technology that the doctors that are excited about. Hopefully, a doctor or two.
Well, we know you, so that's the main point.
Yeah, Michael, I think there's
Very
two
happy to share what I'm excited about anytime.
I think there's two rites of passage for any retail investor in Australia. The first is buying a specky mining explorer and saying, if they find minerals, I'm going to be rich. And the second is buying a biotech that has the results of a trial coming up and saying, if these trials pass, I'll be rich. And it's a good learning to get past both of those early and be a bit more sensible in your investing. But look, we are almost out of time. But I do just want to, you're so knowledgeable about this space, but it's great to see you're so excited about this space. You mentioned a few innovations that were exciting you, but is there anything else that's coming down the pike in the coming years in this space that's getting you really excited at the moment?
Look, the ability to knock in and knock out proteins is fascinating. I think a big question will be, does the mRNA technology we've got now, can that apply to cancer? There's a big oncology pipeline. Will they be able to find a way to generate some kind of protein that can then elicit some kind of immune response or in some way treat various cancers that are untreated? That's a big open question. And those companies, Moderna, Pfizer, BioTech, have tens of billions of dollars of cash right now pouring in for their successful vaccines with which to use to try and find an answer to that question. That's one I don't have a strong opinion on. I just don't really know. I certainly hope it works, and I'm sure that with time, people find a way to use these technologies to make it work. The other one is there's really good immune approaches to cancer that work in blood cancers like leukemia, but don't really work for solid tumors. And again, there's lots of different approaches being tried. I don't know if any of them will work, but I certainly hope that they do. That's another big open question in the industry. Can they have the success that they had in liquid cancers in solid tumors? I guess the third thing is, and I guess this is close to all of our hearts, is can they crack this anti-aging puzzle? It's such a mystery, but there's so many clues. It's a really interesting problem. Why we age is not so hard to at least hypothesize about. There's all kinds of things that benefit you in the young, and once you pass an animal's past reproductive age, there's less reason to keep that. So you're constantly making evolutionary trade-offs. That hypothesis seems pretty sensible, but there's all other kinds of questions about how it happens and why it happens and whether there's ways to stop that. And that's obviously an interesting commercial issue, but it's probably been massively under-researched relative to the potential to kind of improve human life. So I think that's another thing that I probably spent an inordinate amount of time reading about. Just could be so interesting if somebody can kind of slowly unlock the keys to that and really understand what's happening, because it doesn't seem like people understand it particularly well now. So there's a few things to watch for and some open questions in the field.
Well, it seems L'Oreal have cracked the anti-aging, haven't they?
It's amazing. Okay, think of how big the anti-aging market is, and then think that there's no evidence that any of it works. Imagine how big it would be if you actually knew there was something that didn't work.
L'Oreal would go out of business if anti-aging actually worked. Anyway, Michael, it's almost mind-boggling to think about cracking the anti-aging and finding all these cures for cancers, and it's really exciting as well to think that we have people in society who are working on that and capable of doing so. So exciting time in life sciences, no doubt one that is providing great opportunity for investors, and we would encourage anyone in the Equity Mates community to check out what you're doing and get involved. What would be the best place if anyone wanted to follow what you're doing, any research? I know you've got a podcast as well. What would be the best place to do so?
I'm on Twitter, Michael Frazis. Feel free to reach out, michael@fraziscapitalpartners.com. And it's a really exciting time to be around, really exciting time to be an investor. And, I think when investing, just be on the right side of these changes, whether it's electric vehicles or cool fintech or crypto or space travel or information molecules. I think being on the right side of that is the right thing, and it's also super exciting and fun. So I'd encourage people to think like that as well.
Absolutely. Well, Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here on Equity Mates at AusBiz for the last week. We've taken a lot out of it, plenty of excitement as well, and I know that many in the Equity Mates community will have taken some value as well. So, as always, we very much appreciate your time. Looking forward to seeing what you can deliver in FY22 and the crazy things that the world throws at us as well. So, appreciate it, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Brian and Alec. Really appreciate it. Great to be on.
Thanks, Michael.
And that brings us to the end of our week with Michael Wren. Really enjoyed it. Took a lot out of it, and we'll have to get him back on.
Yeah, he's really set the bar for whoever we get on for the next long form interview. But I think this is definitely a format we want to bring back. I think this was a great week. I certainly learned a lot, and yeah,
absolutely,
it was great.
Well, we'll be back next week with more Equity Mates on AusBiz, but until then, have a great weekend. Well, Friday comes before the weekend, I know that, but have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.